Now live. Can you guys see my screen? Tell me I'm paused.
Yep.
You can? Okay, cool. And when I flip it, can you see it flip?
No, it still looks the same.
Mic to recreation, please. Mic to recreation.
Haven't heard that in a while. So it's not. Oh, there we go. Okay, now it's working. All right. It's something to do with my full screen versus not full screen. Now it's working.
Oh, Mike Berry's on there, Christine,
Okay.
if you want to move him over. Hi, Mike.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Can't complain. Zoom world.
Thank you, Alicia. Yeah, I was just going to say, for those of you who are joining us, there are some items up here on the screen. So to get started, we're just asking that you write in your name, title, and the community that you're representing in the chat box. There they come.
Kevin. Mike, you're already getting shout outs in the chat box.
Already? What do we got?
And all right. As people are joining, if you'd like to add your name and role and community in the chat box, that would be great so that we can see who's here today.
Patty, what are you doing here? Aren't you retired? So great to sort of see you.
Gotta keep learning, that's for sure. All right. Shall we? It's 12 o'clock on the dot. All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending the 36th annual, however, first virtual MRPA conference. The session will have closed captioning and we will be recording. Any questions that you have along the way can be submitted through the Q&A box, and we will try to get all of those answered for you towards the end of the session. CEUs will be awarded at the conclusion of the conference with forms submitted directly to John Whalen. So if you have any issues or need another copy of that, just let us know. An evaluation will also be added to the chat feature at the end of the session. So we'll put that link right in there and you can fill out the evaluation just as you finish. Check that off your box. All right, today's session is going to be sponsored by Musco Sports Lighting. The session is Why Capital Planning and Master Planning Go Together. So I'm going to give, actually, before do I do that now? Yes, I'm going to give Mike a chance to speak now before I introduce our speakers for today's session.
Thank you, Christine. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be the sponsor of this session. Hopefully everybody gets a lot out of it. Obviously, I've worked with Melissa and Meg over several years on various projects, so I know you're going to learn lots from their information. I just want to share one quick video, just kind of fill you in on a new product that Musco is offering now. The wave of the pandemic, we kind of released it a little earlier than we anticipated, but I just wanted to share a quick little video.
Mike, do you need me to stop my share?
What's that?
Do you need me to stop my screen share?
Oh, maybe. Is that why I won't?
All right, now try.
There it is.
When it's time for your facility to shine a little brighter, reach a lot farther, and let their whole world watch the biggest game of their life, there's Musco Vision, a system that's streamlined and complete, broadcasts that are automated and fluid, with connectivity you can count on, and a new source of revenue for years to come. No on-site staff is needed for operation. Games are easy to find and fun to watch. It's time for your facility to stand apart and let everyone know that the days of waiting to hear about how their game went are over.
So if anybody has any questions regarding that, it's obviously a new streaming platform that Musco is doing. But outside of that, I put my information in the chat box. Hopefully you guys enjoy the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. And before I move on, I do see we have one hand raised, and I didn't know if Tim McGrath, if that was something that you wanted to ask now, if you were having issues with the presentation. Oh, and now I just lost you. All right, Tim, you can talk if you do have a question. Maybe not. All right, I'll go ahead and lower your hand then for now. Okay, so today's session is why capital planning and master planning go together in outdoor recreation. And this will be presented by Melissa Petit and Meg Buzinski. Melissa is the Director of Recreation and Community Programs for the town of Lexington. Melissa has presented at conferences with a focus on partnerships, collaborations, inclusion, and professional development. And we have Meg, who is a civil engineer and has focused on planning, design, permitting, bidding, and construction for the last 17 years. In addition to her work with Activitas, she has been working with the town of Lexington since 2002. All right, so without further ado, welcome Melissa and Meg.
Great, thanks Christine, and thanks Mike for opening up our session. And yes, so many of you, it's so great to see your names. I'm sorry we can't be together. Meg and I had planned on presenting this in person last year, and we're really grateful that MRPA invited us back to join this virtual conference. So we're looking forward to sharing some ideas and some concepts with you. But as Christine said, I'm in Lexington. I've been here a little over 4 years, but I've been in public recreation, municipal recreation for just about 30 years in Connecticut and Massachusetts.
Great. And my name is Meg Bazinski. So as Christine mentioned, I'm a civil engineer working for Activitas. We're right in Dedham, Massachusetts. And this is really, what we focus on. We focus on outdoor athletic and recreation. So parks, courts, fields, lighting, all of those good things. And I've been doing this, right out of college. And really just developed a passion for it. It's fun, it's enjoyable. We have wonderful clients, like all of you, listening to this presentation. So we hope that this is going to be really helpful. So jumping right in, we have 3 learning objectives for today. The first is Melissa's going to talk about capital planning and how capital planning can really work for you and how it provides you with kind of the nuts and bolts to, to do your planning and to figure out what you need and actually be able to implement it. The second point I'm going to take is about outdoor. What is an outdoor, master plan, and how do we go about starting it? What are we trying to do during it, and then how do we bring it out, into the public and gain support for it? And then the third point or objective is just to put them together, right? So, the worst thing is when you do a master plan and it goes and sits on a shelf. You want to make sure that this is something that works and is, developed right into your capital plan, so you can bring it to your administrators and really get projects up and running so you can have all the facilities that you need. So moving right in, we'll start with capital planning.
Great, thanks, Meg. So capital planning sounds and feels super overwhelming, and just to kind of water it down a little bit, what we do as professionals is we plan, right? We plan programs, we plan services, we plan staff trainings, and so the idea is here is approaching your capital plan in the same way, having a plan from A to Z and understanding it and being thoughtful about it so that you can approach it in a way that's logical, that makes sense for your agency and your department, but also will match up with the goals and the mission and vision of your town. So one place you can start is identify where your current assets are. What's your inventory? So playground, ball field, benches, your athletic lighting, all of those things, and identify those assets so that you know where you're starting from, because you have to, you need to know where you're starting from in order to go somewhere, right? So as part of that asset inventory for your capital, sort of the outdoor recreation assets, you also want to know what are the other assets in town that are going to help support you when you want to act upon your plan. So many towns have a community comprehensive plan, which focuses on housing, recreation, the town demographics, transportation, economic development, and it includes a needs assessment. So that's something that if you are not sure if your town or city has, or you do have access to that, take a look in there and see what the town's plan for recreation includes and how you can start to build some of those goals into your plan. For recreation specifically, the state has a park and open space master plan. And if towns do engage in these plans, they're renewable and updated every 7 years. It gives you access to different grant money as well through Massachusetts. So here in Lexington, we're in the process of updating ours. So for FY22, so as part of our capital plan, we're requesting funding to do that update with a consultant. And then you can move over to what the capital plan will be. So you take the actual assets that you have out in the field, you take your live documents that are throughout town and complement that with whatever you may have. Your department may have a strategic plan. It may already have some needs assessments or master plans for different pockets of town. Sometimes there might be a full park, or you might do it in a different area. But what you need to identify is, how long you want that to be for your capital project. And as a reminder, anything capital is $25,000 or more. So that's where you would be, looking at your threshold there. So planning for your timeline. Some communities have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, or, they might have even a 20-year plan vision out for their town, depending on where you are. Your town may not have a plan at all. It may just be an annual plan, and you can come up with new requests every year. But that doesn't mean that you can't have your own 5-year plan for your agency once you determine what that's going to look like. So you create your timeline, how far out you want to go. And in part of that timeline, when you have your assets, you're going to need to determine a few things that are going to prioritize where things fall in that timeline. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So part of your timeline, you have to identify your funding sources as well. So whether your department is self-funding, if you rely on grants and donations, if your town has community preservation funds, if you have tax levy, if you can roll your project into other existing projects to maximize your funding sources in town. So it'll be really important to identify what those sources are so that those funding sources and where those appear in the town's budget also can mirror up for a more successful request when you bring your projects forward. So identifying your project ideas, as we all know, we want to keep up with the trends. We want to be responsive. We hate to say no to our communities, but having a strong capital plan in place that you can justify and defend with all of the other pieces that you put together into your plan will be really important for you to build your advocacy along the way. So you'll have your capital improvement recommendations. A lot of those will be based on health and safety. So an asset may be coming to the end of its life, so you have to replace that playground. Or the lighting system, you're up at the 25 years, you need to replace that and upgrade it. Or your filters at the pool are failing, so you need to plan for that. So it's really important to know the life cycle of your existing assets, as well as understanding the life cycle of those assets when you introduce new ones. So you can then start building that timeline out, whatever it might be, 5, 10, 15 years. Your user group will, for outdoor rec, will certainly tell you what they want and need. They're going to tell you to save the trees. They want synthetic. They don't want synthetic. They're going to tell you they want more bleachers. They want more park benches. So, leveraging those conversations and working with them in a proactive way will benefit you when you start to bring some of these project ideas forward. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. The citizen requests are often going to be very different than the user group requests and very different than the funding sources and the availability to actually bring that project to life in a reasonable time. So rely on your systems. If you have a recreation committee or you may have other types of groups that you talk with, rely on them as your advocates. They're the volunteers who are committed to their town and they want to see the town improve and be a better place to live for everyone. So rely on them to make some of those decisions for you as the staff and as the agency bring them forward and let them determine sort of the next steps with your professional input. And then, of course, the current trends, the community is just going to want what they want when they want it. If they want a swimming pool outdoors and they want it, it's because they probably have children or they're swimmers, but they're not going to see the big picture of what is going to improve the town long term and help to support health and fitness for years to come for many generations. So it's important for us to stay on top of the trends for technology, improved assets, and new ideas that may not be even on anyone's radar yet. And then you want to always consider the deferred maintenance. A lot of times you'll see in cities and towns, or it may be even in your own, is that you'll get the funding, people will donate an asset, and then there's no operational funding put into your operating budget or any kind of plan for the deferred maintenance and the ongoing upkeep. So that is an important part to your planning, which will then affect your operations, which may mean you need to ask for more money at the same time as you're looking at these capital planning projects. And then how do you justify the project? You take all of this information and you then begin to write your story and explain to all of those decision makers why and how and when this is going to be the best impact for your community.
Great. So from there, we're going to jump right into master planning. And so what you see here is, master planning is not a one size fits all process, but there are kind of very, kind of 7 steps to get us there. And I'm going to move you through these, one by one. And really they go back to those elementary W questions, the who, what, where, when, why, and then throw on a how. That how is what we really want to do. And we're going to bring it back to capital planning in the end. So the first step is all about establishing your vision. You have to decide why you need a project, just like Melissa was saying. You took, kind of an analysis of your inventory to see what you need. You looked at what works, what issues you're having around town, obstacles, things that you're missing. And then, all of these are really based in this MRPA mission statement. As Park and Rec professionals, you are looking to promote, advance, and develop the improvement of recreation, to your people and to your community. And so that really starts with that big question, that why. Why do I need to do this? And then we move into what we need to do. So after we kind of say, all right, I have this problem and I'm going to figure out a way to solve it, we're going to determine your master plan type. And I have 3 examples that are very different, but I know, master planning can sound overwhelming. It sounds very big, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. You can go big and master plan your whole town. Or you can, look at small pieces that go along with it. So for example, with Melissa, we completed, an ADA study, which was really a master plan looking at what is accessibility like through the town of Lexington at their recreational facilities. And this is a document that, outlines the challenges, looks at what we want to do, understands the costs. And this is a document that Melissa can pull through year after year and pull projects out of it. Another example is the town of Scituate. They had at their high school, middle school, a very large area that was just in poor condition. They had these challenges. They had gender equity challenges. They had just layout challenges. They had field challenges, all these different things. And that didn't look at the entire town, but focused on one particular site and said, what can we do on this site? How do we study it? How do we plan it and think about all those components to make it better for the town? And there are a lot of other things, there's looking at water, water access for towns, looking at storage, looking at, athletic lighting. This was a master plan we did for the town of Weymouth. And what we were trying to decide is the fields are in tough shape. Why are they in tough shape? So we took a look at, how many events they were having on their fields per year. And then we started to look at the different, 20 sites to say, all right, let's pick out the ones that make the most sense to really dive into. And to figure out what site makes sense to renovate first, how to renovate it, how to bring other components that aren't necessarily field related, but more park related to support those additional programs. And then we were able to start moving it right through. And this was, another a lighting master plan that we did for Lexington, and we looked at their lighting, around town to see how could we upgrade what was existing to make these fields work better for them. So it doesn't have to be big; it can be small, and they really fall into these 3 categories. The components that you see on the left-hand side. There are more, and I'd love, feel free to throw into the chat something that you've done in town, some idea that you don't see on the left-hand side there that you said, this was an issue for us. We'd love to hear. We want this, we're virtual, but we'd love to kind of keep it interactive. So that chat or that Q&A is the way to help us do that. But as we think about the type of master plan, we're still determining that type. We look at critical needs, kind of sustainable needs, and then these visionary projects. The critical are really immediate, those health and safety type things that Melissa was talking about. They're smaller projects. They're a little bit easier to turn around from the capital side. They're probably on the lower end of what they cost, but they make a real difference, to your community members who are using these facilities. A sustainable project is probably looking at an existing site. Like I was talking about for Scituate, the site that needs work. And we say, but what can we do? How can we, rather than just putting back exactly what's there, how can we make that better and work better for our programs? So that's probably a slightly larger need, but within, what you have to work with right now. And then you can move into visionary projects. This one on the right-hand side is Weymouth again. You can see 2 fields that came out of that much larger master plan that are really transformational. This was a balance of upgrading some fields to turf, putting lighting on there so we can really focus play on there. But as a domino effect, they're actually able to keep their grass fields in a lot better condition. And then it also looked at, tennis courts, how accessible those are to the community. It reorganized where programs were being run. And in the end, it really did increase the inventory. And in some towns, increasing that inventory, may even be, thinking about purchasing land or, some sort of public-private partnership if there are, private institutions in town that you can work with. So it's when you're thinking about that original why, that vision, right? We say, all right, where does this master plan kind of fall into the crux of it? So we can start being realistic with what we can bring to the town administration and just the community at large. So the next steps, you have your why and you have your what. And now you need the people to actually help you get there. So your project team, your working group, they are the people who are going to support you, and they are the group that really gets the work done. And we'll talk a little bit about the next group, next team pieces in a second. But these are going to be if they're coming from the Park and Recs group, you're probably someone on here is likely going to be the team leader for that working group. And you're going to think about which departments in town are going to help me really develop my vision. Who's going to be on board with me? You're going to think about things like, all right, where is this project located? Is it located near resource areas? Well, if it's located near resource areas, we probably got to get conservation on board. Is this something that's right adjacent to, DPW or engineering has a project coming up? Maybe they need to be onboarded so we can work together and get some efficiencies, later on, and make sure that no one's, reinventing the wheel with whatever they're doing. And so you're just going to go through, and it may be that you want to bring on user groups a little bit earlier, especially if there's a group that's, really dedicated to what you're doing. You don't want that working group to be too large, kind of too many cooks in the kitchen. You want to make sure that it's efficient, but that you have the voices on that working group to be able to start to reach out to other areas of town and build that community support. All right. And then once you have your internal team, and since you already know what your what is, that's when you can potentially bring on a consultant to help you do this work. Master plans are not, it's a lot of time, and that's what consultants do. We take our time and we figure things out for you. And so you're going to have to figure out what type of consultant it is. Is it kind of a broader planner? Is it someone who's, really focused on what you're trying to achieve? All those types of things. So it's figuring out who that right team is to move forward.
And Meg, if I can just add to the that conversation with building your team, how often many of us in Park and Rec say, well, it would have been nice to have been invited to that meeting and have a seat at the table, as everyone says. And this is our opportunity to be the one creating who's sitting around that table. And so we often, try to include everyone, and that's sort of who and what we do and what's going on. And everyone doesn't have to be at the table at all the times, but it's really important to be thoughtful about that from the beginning, because we all know what it feels like not to be at that table and find out about a project too late in the game. So when you're building this team, talk to your staff and talk to your colleagues and really talk to some of the people you typically don't talk to, because you're going to find out that there's something else going in town that will either complement or challenge the direction you're going.
Exactly. And as you build that working group, so now that working group is really doing, they're the ones actually bringing it through. But the next piece of building your team is actually, gaining that community support. So as you start to embark on that master plan and you start to get through and start to come up with ideas, we have to think about, all right, eventually I'm going to have to sell this, right? I'm going to have to bring this out to the community. And the worst thing you can do is keep it close knit and not tell anybody and then try to sell it later. The more you can have that organic growth of bringing people on board and letting those ideas kind of blossom and generate in themselves, it's going to be easier down the line to say, all right, it's time. We need funding. You know about this. This is so great. Let's get it going. So you always want to think about, all right, who, after our working group, how do we appropriately bring it out to the wider audience to start them thinking about it and gaining that support. All right, and then we go into kind of the next three pieces are kind of the real meat of that master plan. So as this group the working group has developed the master plan, depending on what it is, maybe it's like a full playground study around the entire city or town. Maybe it's looking at one park to say, all right, how do we make that better? What are we going to add? What are we going to subtract? But eventually, once you start to develop that plan and you have some of that community support for it, because you presented it, that's when you want to start thinking about, all right, costs. What does this actually cost? Am I actually going to be able to bring this to, city council or town meeting or, whatever to try to fund this study? We want to make sure that anything coming out of your master plan is realistic. There's nothing worse than a non-realistic plan coming out of a master plan because it's going to go sit on that shelf. All right. And you have to know your community in order to be able to do that. So project priorities. So all of a sudden, let's say you have a master plan and 10 projects come out of this thing, right? You did a big one and you say, okay, well, how do I figure it out? Where do I go? What do we start with, right? And so you have to decide what are those priorities. Now, there may be things, as Melissa was mentioning earlier, capital improvements that just have to get done because something is at the end of its life. It's pretty soon not going to be safe. We need to get that done immediately. That's probably going to start with your project priorities kind of on list number 1. And then we can get into accessibility, looking at deferred maintenance, where do we need to put money so we can maintain some facilities that we have that may need, a little love to get back to where they should be. And then you can start looking at those wants versus true needs. And looking at kind of those bigger projects or just planning it out. And what we have to remember, and this goes back to capital planning, is that it doesn't all have to come at once. This master plan, like we mentioned, is meant to be a working document. Just kind of a little anecdote. I was speaking with one of your colleagues the other day, and she was mentioning that she didn't know where to start, right? And so we said, all right, well, what have you done so far? And she mentioned that probably 10 years ago there had been a master plan, and so I started taking a peek at it, and there was such great information in there. The bones of what we're trying to do, but it was very overwhelming. There was just so much information, and it just needed that next step to be able to bring it out to the broader community to gain support and really break down the pieces and make sure that they're, that's realistic. That's what we want. Any master plan coming out, we want to be realistic. And those timelines, as you phase a project, can look at the capital plan, 5 years, 10 years. There's really no limit to how you can do it. But you need to start having that conversation about how to fund it, because that's going to be a big driver in terms of those timelines. So that final master plan document, what you're seeing at the end should be something that people enjoy looking at. Graphically, it should look really nice. It should have the information really easily accessible. You don't want to read, 80 pages before you get to where you need to be. But you can use this document as a best practice manual. And then you can start bringing it into your capital plan to move it forward. And with that, we're going to jump back over to our master plan is done. We have this great plan. All right, how do we implement it? How do we get going?
Great, thanks, Meg. So as you had mentioned, there's different ways to approach this as well. I know I've sat in a few sessions and there's some amazing work going on around the state where people have master plans for every single park, and then they put things into different buckets. And so I was fortunate when I came to Lexington. There's a very strong capital plan here. And I think my colleague Dave from DPW is on the call now. And it's really important to have a strong partner in the other departments here in Lexington. For an example, recreation manages and takes control of all the operations and the user groups, and DPW maintains them. And then we have a shared cost depending on what the project is. And we have a very healthy community preservation program here. But in terms of coming into Lexington, the approach here is a combination. There's large projects, but then there's also projects that are standing items that are part of our capital plan every single year. So we have a bucket for hard court resurfacing. So every year we're taking a look at our basketball, our track, and our tennis courts to see if they need any repairs or what needs to be done there. And when you're looking at that, you'll look at your fencing, and then you'll look at your signage, and you'll look if you need new benches. And then it becomes a mini master plan for that element within your park. And so here we also have a running capital every year, some improvements to our athletic fields. So some years it's a full, do the whole field over. Some years it's just a laser grade. Other years it's adding or improving irrigation. So that's a standing item as well. And so when you look at the golf course, we also have 2 standing items with equipment and then the outdoor landscape piece that we alternate. So every other year at golf, they'll either get a piece of equipment or they're going to have some exterior work done out on the course. So you need to think about what would the appetite in your community would be for those types of buckets in terms of where you're going to get started. I always like to say it's better to be proactive than reactive. And of course, we always have to be reactive if it's an emergency, or you may have new families that move into town with different needs, especially when it comes to access. But for some of these other pieces, your capital plan should be very proactive. So once you have your plan, how do you then make sure you can justify this, and who do you bring in? So who are your decision makers? So you have your rec committee, you might have a select board or city council, but you also have the Commission on Disabilities. You also have the Conservation Committee. You have all of these other like-minded groups that are trying to improve your community, but may not necessarily touch every project you have, but they are going to help drive those decisions when it comes to voting an override that might include one of your larger projects, or going to town meeting and defending a vote for you. They may not ever even go to that park or that facility or use those assets, but because they've been part of the process and they've been able to weigh in, then they are naturally becoming your advocates and your voice out in the community. So identify those decision makers, and then how do you build it into your planning? So we just came off of a needs assessment, and if you have any plans for those, or you have any of those documents that when you go to your office are sitting on the shelf and they're not living, just put them on your desk and start referring to them. In every presentation, every discussion you have, revert back to the language in that and say, oh, well, in 2017, we had the ADA compliance and the Commission on Disability voted this as the #1 project. And that goes into your story. And then you say, my needs assessment, this came back and they identified these several programs that they wanted more of. And this is why we're asking for $10,000 more in operational funding. So referring back to that to justify not only your ask, but justify to the community that their investment in those previous projects are actually being implemented, and they'll build trust that you're actually going to, have action items for these other projects that many times, as we all know, we all have them. We just have, files and bookshelves filled with documents that have never been opened. I know I haven't opened things, and I've had them for a really long time. One thing I would say is just be prepared for the pushback. The overarching, there's always the elephant in the room, and we're always competing with police, fire, and schools. And that's something that is really important to be aware of. What else is going in town when you're thinking about the decision makers, and how can you tell your story to those that may not see the vision as you, or may not see that your project is as important or as a priority to town. So it's better to become friendly with those folks and know where they're going to challenge you before you bring your request to the town meeting floor, or before they show up and bring the challenge to you and you weren't ready for it. So, and that's an example that we are dealing with right now. We have the playground as a standing item in our 5-year master plan, and we're replacing a playground, and it's supposed to mobilize in a week. And the neighborhood now decided in the last 10 days to do a petition and put the brakes on it because they're not happy with the selection. So, you just have to be, understand. And luckily we have our monthly playground inspections. We have pictures, we've had assessments, we had quotes and different companies come in. So we did our homework, but sometimes it's still not enough depending on your community and what they really want when they want it. So onboarding the community, we learned is that we needed to expand our footprint for that particular park. We needed to include a broader portion of the neighborhood outside of the traditional abutters list for notifications. So that's something that we're learning and improving our capital plan as we move into FY23. So as you're starting to socialize this and you onboard the other community groups, the socialization of the implementation of your plan is really, really important. So start talking about it well before that particular fiscal year. Go to the Lions Club, the Rotary, go to the League of Women Voters, and let them know what's coming and say, hey, in 3 years, this is what we're looking at. So you can start to be proactive and people will then trust your plan. And it's not just your capital plan. They'll then trust you in all of your planning because they're going to see that you are being thoughtful and you're being proactive and that you have the community's best interest at heart.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to point out one last example that really kind of, I feel, pulls together capital planning and master planning so well. And it's this picture that you can see right here, which is Lincoln Park in Lexington. And, this one's near and dear to my heart. This is actually one of the first projects I ever worked on out of college. It was built in 2003. But what you don't realize is that originally we were hired to go in and do some renovations to grass fields that were there. This was an old glass landfill in town that had been capped, and there were some really kind of terrible grass fields out there. And so we were brought on to look at it and say, all right, how do we look at this and how do we upgrade it? How do we just fix those grass fields? We got some money from a donor. And as we went in, we looked at it and we said, you know what? There is such opportunity out here. Can we take a step back and actually master plan this site? And that's something that, I think, a lot of communities could, if they're willing to do it, it makes a big difference. Is sometimes you say, okay, this is my project and I just got to go in and do it. And you have to sometimes take that step back to say, hold on a second, could this actually be better? Could I find different funding sources to bring this to the next level? And what this park turned into, rather than just 3 grass fields that would be overused and would have to be resodded the next year, what we were able to plan out is a very large park that has 3 turf fields, usable turf fields, a brand new playground area internally. These were actually existing softball and little league fields in this corner, and then over on the kind of the left-hand side here, we were able to maintain those. But there were other elements that were brought into this park, right? So you think about the trails. Lexington has a very active trail system that runs through the town. And so how can we actually use these facilities as, to allow people from the bike path to access it, to use the fitness trails that we have along the edges, to bring their kids to the playgrounds, all those types of things. And being able to step back and say, all right, from a capital planning standpoint, we were going to spend, whatever the amount was, $300,000 to upgrade some fields. Now we have to spend more, but in the end, it's going to make such a difference, to our community. And then looking forward, as we think about that capital plan as well, like I mentioned, this was all built in 2003. Since that time, we've had to do the carpet replacements, that have come to their end of the life. There have been renovations to the grass fields, yearly maintenance, deferred maintenance, things like that to keep those, upgraded. A community group in town ended up putting the lights at the soccer field. And so it's this master plan that started to really develop, but that it kept going. And it took it to the next level and it added things, just because you do a park and it's done doesn't mean it has to stop. You can keep thinking about that and phase it and say, well, we're not ready to do this right now, but when can we do it? And how can we fund it? And so it's all those pieces that go into that the capital plan, that Melissa was talking about, to keep it going. Let's just keep it alive. Let's keep the ideas flowing, and just move forward that way. And just, it's so helpful, I think, to all the steps along what you all do. But if you can get the facilities to really help your programs, this is a great way to do it.
And Meg, for this particular park, I would like to add too that we've created a large community park. That it's one of two here in our town, but that's exactly what it did. So now we've created this park that has so many different experiences, whether it's the nature trail, the grass fields for playing on the diamonds, the synthetic fields that really are home to almost every age level in sport, depending on whether it's the high school, the youth sports, we've got adult leagues, the playground. But then people started to build this sense of, wow, this is a great place to go, but we don't have restrooms. So we had a building donated, and we had to build that into our capital plan because it's on our property. We had to build in the plan for accepting that donation. And then what does that mean for your deferred maintenance and operations? So we had seasonal restrooms donated. The athletic lights, as you see, those were donated through a large townwide campaign, which the soccer club initiated, but they raised money because now that field benefits a whole bunch of other organizations other than just youth soccer. And then this past year, the Boosters Club for one of the soccer teams at the high school donated a bleacher system. So, people are starting to realize, okay, what else can we do? And it's the want versus the need. Is it in the plan, and do they want to wait? And if they don't want to wait, sometimes they'll figure out a way to make it happen. And in other ways, we then say, well, now they want bleachers at another field. So we'll build that into our renovation 2 years down the road. So at least they know it's coming. And this spring at all three of those synthetic fields, we're having scoreboards. They were donated by the lacrosse program. They're solar powered scoreboards that will now be there. And so that one decision back in when Meg, I don't know, what'd you say, 03, to really look at this site and work with the town and DPW to create this vision has now turned into a very different park than anyone probably would have thought it would have looked like back in 03. And now it's one of those things where when we take one of these fields or these amenities offline, it's such a huge impact because it's overused actually. So it's really something to think about, like, the baby steps to get there, and then to think, 18 years later, what this park really is and what it's providing to the community outside of just sports. I mean, it also brings challenges. We've been struggling with people shoveling those fields for the last 3 weeks and couldn't wait for them to the snow to melt. But given the climate that we're in right now, I think that as an industry, we are in a very unique time to build our advocacy more than ever. There are people who have been using our parks and our park system that had never known about certain conservation lands or trails, that didn't know about certain playgrounds in town because they were trying to try different things with their children to keep everybody outside and healthy during the last almost 13 months. So really think about that. This is a really, what do they say? Strike while the iron's hot. This is a time where people really value what we do. They value where we do it. And outdoor recreation is at a premium right now. So this is a great time to really wrap your hands around what your plans are and where they're going.
Yeah, and so our last slide is just some resources that we think will be very helpful for you all. So looking at, CPA funds and what types of projects you can start. Master plans actually can come from CPA funds, no matter, what type of master plan they are. So, if you're a CPA organization or of town, that's a really great resource. Obviously Massachusetts in itself has programs, local aid programs to help out capital projects. And then you have, kind of alternative ways to purchase things. You have the mass bid list, you have, cooperative purchasing programs, things like that. And those are ways that, they're out there and they're great savings because the products that you're buying have already been vetted. And so it's something that it can actually move things along quite a bit faster than kind of the normal procurement process. But you also can be confident in the materials, that you're receiving. And then, the USTA is just an example, but so many of the organizations have, grants and assistance. So, we just finished up a tennis lighting project in town and received some help from the USTA to help fund that because, USTA, those organizations in themselves, they need people playing their sports. to keep their sports going. So they are willing to take their money and put it towards, your communities to keep that involvement active. And there's many more I'd love to see in the chat as well. If anyone else has used any resources, any fundings, grants, things like that for some projects. But from there, we'd love to open it up for questions. I think Christine's going to lead us there.
I think
love
it's
to-
great, if someone has a success story on, starting from the beginning, or starting from the beginning and some of the roadblocks, anything you'd like to share that, we left this extra time purposely so that we can have some discussions and share best practices and really try to build that as if we're all in the same room together.
All right. So any questions out there or experiences that you'd like to share? Got a great turnout of just about 70 attendees. I'm sure we've got some things we can discuss. From Mike Berry, mentions that US Soccer has grants. Mike, would you like to share a little bit more about that? I can, where'd you go? No. Sorry, was I not supposed to read that out loud?
Yes.
Is anyone else familiar with the US Soccer grants?
Christine, I'm not familiar with it, but I would say just check it out. We've been able to access some grants from USTA that would, at one point in time, we thought was going to be competitive, but now they're funding lining for pickleball. And so we've created our hard surface courts to be multi-use, just like our fields, rather than having to build individualized, standalone, unique experiences. So we've gone in that direction here. I know every town and city will approach it differently, but there's probably, whether it's $10,000 or 50, every little bit helps. And I would say, soccer is probably very similar. There's probably a lot of opportunities there around equipment.
Yeah, they have different level of grants, different award times throughout the year. We just partnered with them on our mini pitch with US Soccer in terms of grants, so that there's different funding sources. I was just throwing it out there as another way, kind of like USTA. You apply, you express your need and how this is going to put you over the top and make your project come to fruition. I know Boston has received money over the years for various soccer projects, so I was just throwing it out there.
Thank you, Mike. We also, from Nick, I believe Nick Campion, but it's not all coming through. But we have a couple of links in the chat box from mass.gov. We've got the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is definitely a great one. And if that is Nick, I'm going to ask him to share, because I know he has been a recipient of this grant in the past. Nick, do you want to talk?
Hi, Christine. Sure. The two links that I posted up there, Land and Water Conservation Fund, and then the Massachusetts Park Grant. Melissa touched a little bit upon it in her presentation, but you do need to have one of those 7-year plans on file with the state. That's the open space and recreation plans. So once you have those submitted and approved, you become eligible for those funding, and they're great resources. So definitely worth investigating.
And
Thanks,
Christine,
Nick.
just to add on some of the grants, it could be, I think, a little discouraging, because sometimes the requirements for some grants are based on your community's demographic profile, and a lot of times it's based on population and or the economics, right? The median income. And so what's nice about most of these that we put up here is that it's really about the grant is for the service and providing the service to the community, versus some of the other types of grants often that we'll see a lot of times come from NRPA, and we feel like, oh, those are just for the big cities. You've got to be a Boston or an LA or something like that to get. These are really local, where we've found that there's been a lot of success, small and large. So don't, turn away from looking at them thinking that that's the case, because we've got communities of all sizes, and, tennis wants to be everywhere. It doesn't matter how big your community is.
Thank you, Melissa. That's helpful. Let's see, we also, someone did mention or ask if the presentation will be shared, and yes, we will be emailing those presentations out to everyone in attendance. And then we have from Patty Carey, there's a program for trails that utilizes graduate or college students who design trail improvements and build them. Town pays a fee for 1 or 2 weeks. Need to find out the name right now, but all right, we could look into that. Thank you, Patty, for the suggestion. And if anyone wants to, I see I do have one person with their hand raised. I'll get to Andrew one moment, but Alicia Day from Littleton, their town operates in silos and all have different strategic plans. I think, yes, we could be familiar with that. And what are your suggestions on how to get everyone to the table? We do have a master plan, but to not follow it.
Alicia, that's a really good point, and that's something that also just takes some time. Which do we have that, right? But if we have to sit down and think about who has plans and which ones overlap with some of our goals, so you can bring those two groups together. So recently we just started bringing together our conservation committee and our recreation committee to talk about their goals in the 5 years, and they're focusing on capital. And we have, I think, 4 or 5 parcels in town here where there's school, recreation, and conservation land all on the same parcel, and they're all managed by the 3 different organizations. So what we're prioritizing are those projects where our parcels of land are together. And then we identified that we had a few projects that were 3 years in a row that property would be being impacted by some sort of work, or we're able to roll something in and have one larger project and bring those things forward. So getting those decision makers together to talk it through, I think would be a great first step. And it's one of those things that takes time, but the people who are on those committees and those decision makers really seem interested, because their goals are going to come to fruition sooner than if they were staying in their silo.
Thank you, Melissa. And that's a great question. And to clarify, yes, Elaine, if you're filling out your CEU sheet, you just hand that in. I put my email in the chat just in case anyone didn't have that form, and I could email you a blank form. But nope, no need to submit it now, just at the end of the session directly to John. I'm going to ask Andrew St. George, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, so we're in Upton, kind of in the middle of this process right now. We've got our master plan. We're at that stage of taking the next step. But one other resource I wanted to point out was the Mass Office on Disability. They do annual grants. Now, obviously, because it's the Mass Office on Disability, whatever you're doing has to be focused on making something accessible or whatever. But when you do your master plan, unless you have a perfect facility, you're going to find a lot of stuff that is not accessible. So for instance, last spring, we got the grant, and it was just to build a walkway to a pavilion that was built at our beach a while ago, to address a specific complaint. But when we had the engineers look at the walkway, I handed them our master plan, and I said, whatever you do with this walkway, I need to make sure that we don't have to tear it out in 5 years when we're doing something on this plan. So they basically took our master plan and took a piece of it to put that walkway in, so that in the future it's compliant. So even if when you're just checking off little projects like that, being aware of how they fold into the overall plan, so that you're not kind of going to the town and going, hey, remember that thing we did? We're tearing it out now. But the Mass Office on Disability can be a great resource. They have both planning and project grants. So wherever you are in the process, they have grants available, and they're, I believe, open every year, generally around October.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Great advice. Let's see, we still have a little about 20 minutes or so. Any other questions or comments? From Patty Carey, can you provide some guidance on how to determine what it might cost to hire a consultant for planning? That's a great question as we plan our budgets.
Sure. So, I mean, I can jump in as a consultant. A lot is going to depend on how big that master plan is. I mean, the way consultants work is is time. You're really paying for time. So depending on the size of that master plan. So for instance, if you, let's say you wanted to do a fields master plan and you have, 30 sites in town, right? It's going to take a lot of time to go to each site, figure out what's there, map it out, do all those pieces. And so I think the way to do it is to understand, I think probably from the town administration side is what is the appetite, for doing a master plan, and start to base it around that, because sometimes people want a lot of details coming out of the master plan, and that is helpful, but that also, it takes a lot of time to get to those details. So if you can start with, obviously you have your vision and you have kind of your what your master plan is, you can start to dial in how many meetings do we need? How many, reports coming out of this do we need? And then you can start to focus in on what that timeline is. I would say, a really large master plan, can be upwards of, $100,000, if you're looking at all these different sites, if it's taking a good, 8 months to do this master plan because there's so much in it, it's going to take a lot of time. If it's something smaller, like you're looking at all the fencing around town, that's something smaller. It's very specific. That's going to be a much smaller master plan. So I think understanding what the realistic budget is, and then establishing, what you can actually fit in it in terms of, how much time to put towards it is where to start.
And Meg, speaking of that, because that sounds like a lot, and many of our towns and cities don't have, procurement officers or a purchasing agent to help them along the way with procuring some of this capital and going out to bid or getting RFQs for quotes. Can you just talk a little bit about the consultants and the, sort of approaching that from the procurement standpoint?
Yeah, sure. So, when we deal with procurement, we're really dealing with kind of two chapters of the law, right? We have, chapter 149, which is really about buildings. And then you have kind of chapter 30, section 39, which is really about, what I'm going to call flat surfaces, right? So outdoor master plans like this really fall into that chapter 30, 39. And technically, by law, you do not need to go out and get free bids, for this type of service. Technically, if you had a project that was, renovating courts or fields or a park or things like that, and it didn't really have, a large building component, it can have, storage sheds and maybe a small restroom. But if the building is not what's driving that project, then that project would fall under chapter 30, 39 again. And procurement wise, you can go out and get whichever consultant you want to get. It gets a little bit more difficult as you get into the chapter 149 in the buildings, because you have to go out and do an RFP and get bids and things like that. So, I think, so many consultants that do the type of work I do, we want to be a resource for those communities. And it all just kind of starts with that question, don't ever be afraid to reach out to, a person like me or, my colleagues, in the industry, because we want to be a help. We want to give you, those first initial steps to get going, because you're going to be able to build something great, and you're going to be able to plan something great. And that just makes what we do, all that more meaningful. So it's really easy to reach out. Never be afraid to reach out. Everyone's happy to answer questions that you may have, about that procurement process or about what you need. You may not know what kind of consultant you do need. And I do get those questions, a lot is, would you, can you do this, or would you do this? And, sometimes I'm like, that's not my wheelhouse, and let me put you in touch with this person, and that person, so they can answer your question. Because what I don't want to do ever is give you the wrong information. But I sure as heck can find the people to give you the right information.
And Meg, that's a really good point, I think, and something that I actually am really grateful for with that bidding rule or law, is that, you've been working here in Lexington since '03. And what ends up happening is that you go back to some of the same locations now because they're up for a new renovation or a new addition or site amenity or different things. And what ends up happening is that you develop these relationships, and the consultant may or may not always be the right fit based on what you're doing. But for some of the things that we do here, and when we work with Activitas specifically, they know the properties. It's sort of like, you know, your groundskeeper knows those ball fields and every blade of grass, or your superintendent at golf knows every single kind of weird thing that's going on. And so those are the types of things when you're thinking about your team, and if you are going to consider onboarding a consultant for part or at some point in your planning, is that now that consultant is part of our extended team who gets to do the permitting with us when we go to conservation. So those advocates now know and trust who we brought on board when we go to Commission on Disabilities, when we do a presentation at town meeting. So when you're thinking about that, you know, think about the services you're looking for and what services you'll be looking for down the road, because it eventually can be an extension of your team. And I think a lot of departments do that depending on which types of services they're onboarding.
All right, thank you. Another question from Alicia, and this one actually I can speak to a little about. It looks like Littleton is planning on conducting a statistically valid survey to check in with the community, since there has been around 23% increase in new residents in the past year. And as Melissa had mentioned, we had embarked on a community needs assessment last year, and part of that process was a statistically valid survey. And the consulting firm that we used actually outsourced that survey to a company called ETC. And it's just amazing, the data and the response rate that we got. It was sent out maybe a month or so into the pandemic. So of course, I think people had a little extra time on their hands and felt pretty engaged, but we did have a wonderful response, gained a lot of valuable information, and having a strategic plan that was falling out of date at that time, it really helped us to reevaluate our direction and kind of focus for the amenities, the needs, and the wants that the community was speaking to. So Alicia, happy to speak with you offline further about that process, and can give you some figures as well in terms of the cost for that portion of it. And then part 2 of the question, are there reports we should be thinking about when gearing up to conduct a master plan? Let's see, Meg or Melissa, would you like to speak to that?
So I'm not sure if I completely understand if it's more than like the Parks and Open Space Plan, those types of reports, or I don't know, Alicia, if you want to hop on and talk through it a little bit. Not to put you on the spot, but it's great to hear your voice.
Oh, hello.
There she is.
So I guess more of, I've found in the past when I'm trying to present some of these projects, like you were mentioning before, constantly going back and citing those previous documents, like, you know, page whatever of the master plan, goal number A59, whatever. All of those things are really important. So are there, as you're kind of creating your toolbox, I guess, of all of these different reports, are there some reports that are going to be more recognized, or have more validity to them? You know, when we're a small town and we're trying to figure out how to use our money efficiently, you know, we really don't have the opportunity to go out and just do tons of reports all the time. So we have to really be selective and pick and choose. And we've had situations in the past where we've done a report, and, you know, someone from one of those groups that's not happy that the report has been conducted will say, well, it's just not really valid. They didn't do this right. So I guess that's my suggestion, or my question is, what are those reports that can get us to that place to create a really valid and strong strategic plan?
So Alicia, as Christine said, we had the statistically valid survey conducted as part of our needs assessment. And in talking about the wants and needs, that entire project, that capital project, it was $50,000 to do our community needs assessment, actually was a direct result of a capital request being voted down at town meeting, because we were going forward with the plan that was in place for expanding one of our facilities. And we had groups come out that said, well, how do you know that's what we really need? That's because we had differing groups. We had another group that didn't want us to develop the expansion for what was proposed, even though it had 20 years of work from the community. And they, bought this community center and said the second phase would be building this expansion. And so it was voted down and they said, we want to know what the needs and the wants are. So we conducted this, and the results still didn't give that group the answers that they wanted, but it's given the community direction, and it complemented the reports of Age Friendly. So if your Council on Aging is part of the Age Friendly network and they've done any work around the census reports or any of the demographics and the projected demographics, you can pull all of that data into your story. And so sometimes there's work through your engineering or your transportation department that is talking about connectivity and safe routes, and how can you build that into easier access to your facilities or to your programs or things like that. So there's probably not, in terms of a type of report outside of a comp plan or the Parks and Open Space plan through the state, outside of the smaller things that are happening all the time, all around us. And so I would take a look at those resources and take a look at your select board's goals. They'll have, 2 to 5 year goals of initiatives that they're trying to accomplish, and how can you build your story to say, and this is going to help the goals of the town to reach more compliance with X or whatever you're trying to introduce.
And just to add to that, back to our ADA study and plan, I think that's also been a very valuable resource to refer to move forward certain capital projects, or even with the needs assessment, when we can refer to, well, this is what the community has said they, place a high priority on to make ADA compliant, and that has really provided some great justification. All right. Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. Hopefully I've addressed most of the questions that have come through the chat. As Mike Berry mentioned, and I don't want to fail to bring attention to, we do have the coffee talk following this session at 1:20. And in case you missed it, anyone who attends the coffee talks are going to be entered into a drawing. So we want to make sure that we get a great attendance to show our support for the sponsors who really make this a conference possible. So hope to see lots of you there. We still have about, 9 minutes. If there are any last questions, comments. Yes, thanks, Nicole. This has been a great discussion, and we're really honored to get the information from 2 of the professionals' finest here in our field, with lots of experience to share. So, and it's been a pleasure for me to work with both of you on some of these things. All right.
If anyone has any questions followed up, our contact information is up there. Feel free to reach out to us, and we can point you in the right direction. Because like Meg said, we don't have all the answers, and we're also looking for answers ourselves. So that's what it's all about, is our networking. And we've got a strong following in Massachusetts, and I think history of holding each other up. So this is a great example of how we can help each other move forward. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yes, and as our attendees show, even a strong following outside of Massachusetts. We've got at least one person from Ohio here today. Tyler, welcome. All right. Well then, again, a thank you to Melissa and Meg for joining us today and for taking the time to share some of your knowledge. And thank you all for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.